All right, you better get the turkey and fixins done by noon on Saturday because that's when the Jackets and Dogs are going to take each other on in Athens again. This is going to be the fourth time in a row 12, 14, 16, 18, 22, excuse me. The fifth time in a row that Georgia will play Georgia Tech in Athens at noon. Now, let me walk y'all through this. Why does this happen all the time with Georgia Tech? This is probably the last time that this is going to happen this way. It may be that Tech and Georgia play at noon in Athens, but there's a couple of things for me to go over here, so be patient with me, okay? First of all, this is not an attractive game. That's just what it is. I mean, you're talking about Georgia, which is either the number one, two, or three program in the country, television draw in the country, but Georgia Tech's pretty bad in terms of the grand scheme of things. So this is not Michigan, Ohio State, Florida, Florida State. But one thing that I've paid attention to, and you probably should too, is um, Tech Georgia could go the way of Florida, Florida State, and that means playing a Friday game. Um, I don't know if that's going to happen, but next year is the final year that CBS has the contract for Georgia in the SEC. Disney takes it over in 2024. The Tech game is in Athens, excuse me, is in Atlanta next year. That means that the controlling rights for that game fall with Disney, and Tech and Georgia completely could play a Friday game in Atlanta. Whether that game would be at noon, 3, or night, I don't know. But there's a window there where if you can, you would take a really good property like Georgia and get it more exposure. Tech Georgia is going to be opposite Ohio State, Michigan. Now that's done on purpose. When you look at the grand scheme of things, um, Georgia and Georgia Tech literally are never going to outdraw Ohio State, Michigan. Georgia Tech, although it did at times get selected for the CBS game in when the game was in Athens back in the day, now that Alabama Auburn has been moved to the Saturday after Thanksgiving, that's no longer the case. So the addition of the SEC to the Disney lineup will really change Georgia Tech. Make sure you're getting what is remaining of our tickets for the Kelee Ringo event. We're really excited about this. It's going to be at Red Zone in Athens on Saturday the 20th. Sunday the 20th. That is the day after the Georgia Kentucky game. You get a book, you get a photo, you get some signatures for whatever you want. I've got the details down below. You can check that out. This is an exclusive, a limited event. We're not going to have hundreds of people getting autographs. That's not what's happening here. So take advantage while you can if we still have them available. So you have been warned. Again, let me delve a little further. So Ohio State plays an off Saturday game every year. They play often on a Thursday night, okay, to start the season. So it doesn't disrupt the rest of their year. I do wonder if Disney came to Josh Brooks, and I don't know the guy at Georgia Tech or the woman at Georgia Tech who's the athletic director, if they came to them and said, "We would like for you to go to a Friday game," what would they say? Georgia would, I don't know about almost certainly, but would have a pretty good likelihood that they would play Tech on Friday. And people will say, well, why? Well, the SEC championship game, this would give you an additional day. And if you know this sort of thing now, you can build it into your schedule so that, like in 2024, all the future schedules, as usual, are kind of, I don't know. I do think Georgia will play Clemson in Atlanta in 24, but like UCLA, Florida State, those games in the future, they will probably happen. They won't certainly happen. They will probably happen because of the expansion of the playoff. All that said, with all of the windows that exist in holiday football, it's one of the most watched times of the year in terms of sports, in terms very specifically college football, from Thanksgiving Day to the championship. That is a huge window of availability for broadcasters uh, and therefore advertisers, which is the whole point of this thing, putting it on TV. Okay. The other time is Labor Day. And you notice with Labor Day, games are spread out Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday. I mean, if you love college football, Labor Day weekend is one of the your favorite weekends of the year. That is probably going to change as well because we're going to see the season start earlier. You also could see in the future that Tech and Georgia play the first game of the year. That is totally possible. In the grand scheme of things, I think that might be what happens one day. I also think it is possible that Tech and Georgia do not play football in the future. I think it's going to be over a lot of people's dead bodies that happens, but it just may be that they are in different forms of college football in the future. It may be that Georgia is with the varsity and Georgia Tech is with the junior varsity. I don't mean that in an insulting way. I really do not. I'm just saying there's a future that could be around the corner that does not involve, you know, Vanderbilt, Georgia Tech, and Kansas State. So that's something to remember as time goes on. I think the other thing too is that this game really is a wonderful rivalry and a rivalry that is not well understood by people outside of the state. I've got a long history in with the state of South Carolina, so I get South Carolina Clemson and all its stupidity. Now, it's not as ridiculous as Mississippi State and Ole Miss, Clemson and Carolina, but it's not so far from it. Maybe they're a little more sophisticated than in Mississippi. Tech in Georgia is really the combination. It is the meeting of two schools that could not be more different, and you get that a lot in certain rivalries. Texas and Texas A&M, obviously Georgia, Georgia Tech. Uh, these are different schools in terms of their direction. Um, they just happen to be geographically located. You can't really say that Tech is the city school anymore. There are probably four times more fans of Georgia in the city of Atlanta, like the city, than Tech. And there's probably 10 times more in metropolitan Atlanta. And around the state, it's not close. But in the 60s and the 50s, Georgia Tech had a power base that doesn't exist anymore. And a lot of their focus athletically has gone away, frankly. I think it's sad. I have a lot of close friends who are Tech people, people that played at Tech, folks that went and graduated from Tech. Um, and they've watched as Georgia has dwarfed them uh, in a million different directions, but most notably in football over the last really the last 50-ish years. One of my favorite conversations with Lauren Smith was, what happened with Georgia Tech? What was the decision? And a lot of people say it was leaving the SEC, and there is truth to that. I don't think it was exclusively that. I think that, to their credit, people like Lauren, Dan McGill, Vince Dooley, they really hustled and worked. I mean, they did the job in terms of going out and selling the program 40, 50, really 60 years ago. And when Georgia broke through in the 60s and certainly the 70s, the momentum was never stopped. You talking about the 70s where Georgia was a pretty good football program, 76, 72. 78, 75. These were good Georgia teams. I do not recall the Tech times at that moment, but they weren't great teams. And then obviously in the 80s, Georgia exploded in a way that Tech could not keep up with. And then Bill Curry left for Alabama. And I think from that moment forward, with the exception of a blip of a half national championship in 1990, Georgia Tech's been largely irrelevant since. I mean, George O'Leary definitely mattered in the turn of the century, but it just Georgia has been with the better league. They are the better brand. They are the larger brand. They have been better at football. They've largely been better at everything, and it's caught up with Tech. So now that this rivalry is slowly dying, unfortunately, it could go the way of LSU Tulane. Um, but Georgia has been ascending for a long time, and the lottery was a reason that it continued to skyrocket. And it is prestigious today in a way that I think a lot of people at Tech never thought it would be. There's some hubris there. Neither of these schools have medical schools, which is really a shame, frankly. Sorry, Augusta, but they both one of them needs to have one, and that needs to happen too. But this game will be at noon. It is a celebration of the state. It is but we are watching one program die a rather slow and sad death, and the other one is emerging into an elite leader, um, and not exclusively on the playing surfaces.